You don't touch a federal judge. It's not just a rule of law, it's a rule of survival. But Tiffany Preston, the lead flight attendant on Flight 492 to DC, didn't know who the quiet black woman in Seat 2A was. She just saw someone she decided didn't belong. When Tiffany placed her hands on that black woman and shoved her back toward economy, the entire cabin went silent. She thought she had won. She thought she had exerted her power. She had no idea that the black woman she just assaulted was Evelyn Harper, a senior federal judge with the power to mobilize the U.S. Marshals with a single phone call. Tiffany Preston was about to learn a brutal lesson. Power isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who decides if the plane takes off at all. The air inside the cabin of Flight 492 was stale, recycled, and thick with the tension of a delayed departure. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon at Miami International Airport, and the tarmac shimmered with heat haze. Inside the metal tube of the Boeing 737, the climate control was struggling to keep up, and so was Tiffany Preston's patience. Tiffany was 34, with a blonde bob cut so sharp it looked like it could sever a limb, and a uniform that was pressed to within an inch of its life. She had been flying with Horizon Air for 12 years. In her mind, this wasn't just a job. It was her kingdom. And on Flight 492, she was the queen. She stood at the galley entrance, greeting passengers with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning, assessing, and judging. She hated the Miami to DC route. It was always full of self-important politicians, lobbyists, and tourists who didn't know how to stow a carry-on. "Welcome aboard. Aisle to your left. Welcome aboard. Sir, that bag is too big. You need to check it." She snapped her fingers at a ground crew member before the passenger could argue. Tiffany was in a foul mood. Her transfer request to the Paris route had been denied that morning by her supervisor, citing complaints regarding attitude. Attitude? She had scoffed. It's called maintaining order. As the line of passengers thinned, a woman stepped onto the plane. She was older, perhaps in her early 60s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back into a severe, practical bun. She wore a simple charcoal pantsuit that looked comfortable but not expensive, at least not to Tiffany's label-obsessed eyes. She carried a worn leather briefcase and a small tote bag. The woman paused at the entrance, adjusting her glasses. She looked tired. "Boarding pass," Tiffany said, omitting the "please." She held out her hand, her acrylic nails tapping impatiently against the beverage cart. The woman offered a polite, tight-lipped smile and held out her phone. "Good afternoon. I believe I'm in 2A. Tiffany glanced at the screen, then at the woman, then back at the screen. First class, window seat. Tiffany's lip curled slightly. She did a quick visual profile. The woman didn't have the flashy jewelry of the Miami wives, the tailored Italian suits of the lobbyists, or the tech bro hoodies of the Silicon Valley transplants. She looked like a librarian, or a school teacher who had splurged on an upgrade she couldn't afford. "Are you sure you didn't upgrade yourself on the app just now?" Tiffany asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "The system lags sometimes." The woman blinked, her expression unreadable. "I booked this ticket 3 weeks ago. Is there a problem?" "No problem," Tiffany said, though her tone suggested there was definitely a problem. "Just check your bag in the overhead bins quickly. We're running late, and I don't want the aisle blocked." The woman nodded and moved past her into the first-class cabin. Tiffany watched her go, narrowing her eyes. She hated when people bought upgrades with miles. It cheapened the cabin. It made her workspace feel less exclusive. "Hey, Sarah," Tiffany whispered to the junior flight attendant, a nervous girl named Brittany. Tiffany refused to learn her real name, calling everyone Sarah or Sweetie. "Keep an eye on 2A. I bet she tries to sneak free drinks. She doesn't look like she belongs up here. Brittany looked uncomfortable. She looks fine, Tiff. Let's just get the doors closed. I run this cabin, Tiffany hissed. Just watch her. The boarding continued. The plane was packed. The air grew hotter. Tiffany's headache began to throb behind her temples. She needed this flight to be over before it began. She needed control. And right now, the quiet woman in 2A, who was calmly reading a thick document with a red stamp on the cover, was irritating her for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. It was the woman's calmness. The way she sat there, possessing the space, completely ignoring Tiffany's presence. Tiffany Preston didn't like being ignored. 10 minutes later, the cabin crew prepare for departure announcement came over the PA system from Captain Miller. The seatbelt sign pinged on. Tiffany did her final walkthrough of the first-class cabin. She checked seatbelts, locked overhead bins, and ensured tray tables were upright. When she reached row 2, she stopped. The woman in 2A, Evelyn, had her leather briefcase tucked under the seat in front of her. But the tote bag was sitting on her lap. She was reaching into it, pulling out a bottle of prescription pills and a bottle of water. "Mom," Tiffany said loudly. Heads turned. All personal items must be stowed under the seat in front of you, or in the overhead bin. Evelyn looked up, pausing with the pill bottle in her hand. "I'm just taking my heart medication. I'll stow it in a moment." "You need to stow it now," Tiffany said. "We are pushing back." "I understand," Evelyn said, her voice calm, possessing a timbre that was low and authoritative. "As soon as I swallow this pill, the bag goes under the seat." "I don't have time for this," Tiffany snapped. She stepped into the row, looming over the seated woman. "Give me the bag. I'll put it in the overhead." "That's not necessary," Evelyn said, her grip on the bag tightening slightly. "It fits under the seat, and I need it accessible." "You are failing to comply with crew instructions," Tiffany said, raising her voice so the business travelers in 1A and 1B could hear. She wanted an audience. She wanted to show she was enforcing the rules. "If you can't follow simple instructions, maybe you're not fit to sit in this cabin." Evelyn slowly took off her reading glasses. Her eyes were steel grey, cold and sharp. "Young lady, I have flown this route twice a week for 10 years. I am taking a nitroglycerin tablet. If you want me to stow the bag before I take the medication that prevents me from having a cardiac event, you are violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, not to mention common decency." The mention of the law triggered something in Tiffany. She hated armchair lawyers. "Don't quote the law to me," Tiffany scoffed. "I am the law on this aircraft until we touch down." "You are a flight attendant," Evelyn corrected gently. "You are responsible for safety. You are not the law." That was it. The snap. Tiffany reached down and grabbed the handle of the tote bag. Evelyn didn't let go. For a second, there was a ridiculous, undignified tug-of-war in the first-class cabin of a major airline. "Let go of the bag," Tiffany shouted. "Unhand my property," Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Tiffany yanked hard, ripping the bag from Evelyn's grasp. The momentum caused Evelyn to lurch forward in her seat. Tiffany threw the bag into the overhead bin and slammed it shut with a deafening crack. "Now sit back and shut up," Tiffany spat, adrenaline flooding her system. Evelyn unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence that suddenly made the cabin feel very small. "I need your name," Evelyn said quietly. "Sit down," Tiffany yelled. She stepped forward, invading Evelyn's personal space. "Sit down, or I will have you removed." "I am standing to get your name from your badge, which you have conveniently flipped over," Evelyn said, reaching calmly toward Tiffany's lapel. Tiffany reacted on instinct, a mix of rage, exhaustion, and entitlement. She raised her hands and shoved. It wasn't a tap. It was a two-handed, forceful shove against Evelyn's chest. Evelyn stumbled back. Her heel caught on the edge of the seat track. She fell hard, landing awkwardly in the aisle between the first-class seats. Her glasses skittered across the floor. A gasp ripped through the cabin. A man in 1B, a lobbyist named Arthur Pendleton, stood up. "Hey, you can't do that!" Tiffany stood, panting, her hands still raised. She stared at the woman on the floor. For a split second, fear flickered in her chest, but she stamped it down. She doubled down. "She assaulted me," Tiffany lied, her voice shrill. "She reached for my badge. That's assault. I was defending myself." Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't shout back. She sat up slowly, smoothing her charcoal blazer. She reached out, retrieved her glasses, and inspected them for damage. She placed them back on her face. Then she looked up at Tiffany. The look wasn't angry. It was something far worse. It was final. Evelyn Harper reached into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. "Put the phone away!" Tiffany shrieked. "Electronic devices must be in airplane mode. We are active. Put it away!" Evelyn ignored her. She unlocked the phone. She didn't dial 911. She didn't dial customer service. She dialed a number she had saved to her favorites. She held the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving Tiffany's face. "Captain Miller to the cabin!" Tiffany yelled toward the cockpit, trying to regain control. "We have a disruptive passenger!" But Evelyn was already speaking. "Director Reynolds," Evelyn said into the phone. Her voice was crystal clear in the silent cabin. "This is Judge Harper. Evelyn, yes, I'm currently on Flight 492 at Miami International. I have just been physically assaulted by a flight attendant. Her name is Tiffany Preston. I am currently on the floor of the aircraft." She paused, listening. Tiffany froze. "Judge?" "Yes," Evelyn continued. "I need you to contact the tower, revoke their clearance, ground this plane, and send the marshals. I want her in federal custody before my feet touch the tarmac." Tiffany's blood ran cold. The silence in the cabin was now deafening. The Queen of Flight 492 had just pushed the wrong pawn. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the first-class cabin was the hum of the auxiliary power unit and the heavy, terrified breathing of Tiffany Preston. Evelyn Harper remained on the floor. She made no move to get up. In the legal world, she knew the value of a crime scene remaining undisturbed. She sat with her legs tucked beneath her, her back straight, despite the indignity of her position, the phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Director. I'm fine physically for the moment, but the threat is active," Evelyn said calmly. "I am being prevented from accessing my medical supplies, and I have been battery assaulted by the lead attendant." Tiffany's mind was racing, a chaotic blur of denial and panic. Who is she talking to? Director who? She looked around the cabin for support, but the faces that usually offered her deference, the wealthy businessmen, the tired politicians, were now looking at her with a mixture of horror and disgust. Arthur Pendleton, the lobbyist in 1B who had stood up earlier, was now frantically typing on his phone. He wasn't texting his wife. He was drafting a witness statement. "You need to hang up that phone," Tiffany hissed, her voice trembling. Captain Miller." The cockpit door unlatched with a mechanical click. Captain David Miller stepped out, looking annoyed. He was a man who prided himself on on-time departures. He had a schedule to keep, and a delay in Miami meant a missed connection in D.C., which meant paperwork. "Preston, what is going on back here?" Miller barked, adjusting his hat. "Tower says we're holding because of a disturbance. Why aren't we buttoned up?" She refused to comply. Tiffany pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn, who was still on the floor. "She wouldn't stow her bag. She got aggressive. She reached for me. I had to push her back to protect the cockpit. She's refusing to turn off her phone." Miller looked down at the woman on the floor. He saw the grey hair, the sensible suit, the scattered glasses. He looked at Tiffany, whose face was flushed and sweaty. The math didn't add up. "Mom," Miller said, stepping toward Evelyn, "you need to get off the phone. We are in active flight." Evelyn didn't look at Tiffany. She looked directly at the captain. "Captain Miller, is it?" "Yes, Mom. Turn off the phone." "Captain, I am currently on the line with Director Silas Reynolds of the United States Marshals Service," Evelyn said, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the galley. "My name is Evelyn Harper. I am a senior judge for the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Your flight attendant just assaulted a federal judge." The color drained from Captain Miller's face so fast it looked like a curtain falling. I'm sorry, who?" Miller stammered. "She's lying," Tiffany screamed, desperate to reclaim the narrative. "She's crazy. Look at her, she's on the floor." Evelyn held the phone out to the captain. "He would like a word with you, Captain." Miller hesitated. He looked at the phone like it was a live grenade. He took it. "This is Captain Miller," he said, his voice cracking slightly. The voice on the other end was loud enough for Tiffany to hear the rumble of authority, though she couldn't make out the words. She watched Miller's posture change. He went from annoyed to confused to terrified. He stood up straighter. "Yes, sir. I understand." "No, I wasn't aware. Yes. Immediately. I will secure the cockpit." "No, we won't move an inch." "Understood." Miller handed the phone back to Evelyn with trembling hands. He looked at Tiffany. The look was one of pure betrayal. "Tiffany," Miller said, his voice deadly quiet, "get in the galley. Sit on the jump seat. Do not speak. Do not move." "But Captain, now!" Miller roared. Tiffany flinched. She scrambled backward into the galley, collapsing onto the jump seat. She buckled the harness, her hands shaking so hard she could barely work the clasp. She felt tears pricking her eyes. "This is insane," she thought. "She's just a passenger. I'm the crew. He's supposed to back me up." She watched as Captain Miller knelt down. He didn't offer a hand. He offered an apology. "Your Honor," Miller said softly, "I am deeply sorry. Are you injured? Do you need paramedics?" "I need my bag," Evelyn said, gesturing to the overhead bin Tiffany had slammed shut. "And I need this plane to not leave the ground until the marshals arrive. The tower has already ordered a hard stop," Miller said. "We aren't going anywhere." Evelyn finally accepted his hand and stood up. She smoothed her suit again. She sat back down in seat 2A. She retrieved her bag from the bin herself, Miller too stunned to help in time. She took her nitroglycerin pill, placing it under her tongue. She closed her eyes. The silence in the cabin was heavy. No one moved. No one spoke. The air conditioning hummed, but the air felt thin. Tiffany sat in the jump seat, staring at the floor, waiting for the apology she felt she was owed. She was still convinced that once the police arrived, they would see it her way. She was the flight attendant. She was safety. That woman was a threat. She had no idea that outside the window, the world was mobilizing against her. The aircraft lurched. It wasn't the gentle motion of a tug pushing them back for departure. It was the violent, sudden halt of the parking brakes engaging. The entire fuselage shuddered. Tiffany looked out the small porthole window in the galley door. They were still at the gate, the jet bridge having just pulled away moments ago. Then she saw the lights. Usually, the tarmac at Miami International is a ballet of luggage carts, fuel trucks, and wandering ground crew. But now, it looked like a crime scene in a blockbuster movie. 3 black SUVs tore across the tarmac, ignoring the marked lanes, bypassing the safety zones. They screeched to a halt directly beneath the nose of the Boeing 737. They were followed closely by 2 Miami-Dade police cruisers and a Port Authority vehicle. Blue and red lights reflected off the silver wing of the plane, dancing across the cabin ceiling like a disco ball from hell. Inside the cabin, the passengers were craning their necks to see. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "Is it a bomb threat?" Captain Miller came over the PA system. His voice was steady, but tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We have been ordered by federal authorities to hold our position. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Do not stand up. We expect authorities to board the aircraft shortly." Tiffany felt a wave of relief wash over her. Authorities. Good. The police were here. They would take the crazy lady away. Evelyn Harper had clearly escalated this with a fake phone call, but the police would see the truth. They would see a disruptive passenger who refused to follow crew instructions. Tiffany rehearsed her statement in her head. She refused to stow her bag. She lunged at me. I feared for my safety. There was a heavy thud as the jet bridge began to move again. It reconnected to the aircraft door with a metallic groan. Tiffany unbuckled her harness. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. She put on her professional face. She prepared to greet the officers and point out the perpetrator. The cabin door opened. It wasn't the gate agent. 4 men stormed onto the plane. They weren't wearing the standard blue uniforms of the Miami police. They were wearing tactical vests over suits. On the back of their vests, in bold yellow letters, was the word Marshal. The lead officer was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a goatee. He didn't look at the passengers. He didn't look at the captain who had stepped out of the cockpit. "Who is the flight lead?" the marshal barked. Tiffany stepped forward, chin raised. "I am Tiffany Preston, and I want to file a formal comp." "Tiffany Preston," the marshal interrupted. He didn't ask. He stated. He stepped into her personal space, far more intimidating than she had ever been to Evelyn. He reached for his belt. "Turn around," he commanded. Tiffany blinked. "Excuse me?" "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. Now!" "Wait!" Tiffany laughed nervously, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. "You're confused. The passenger in 2A, she assaulted me. She's the one you want." The marshal grabbed Tiffany's wrist. He spun her around with a practiced, forceful efficiency. Cold steel clicked around her wrists. "Tiffany Preston, you are under arrest for assault on a federal officer, interference with a flight crew, ironically, and deprivation of rights under color of authority." "You can't do this!" Tiffany shrieked as the handcuffs bit into her skin. "I'm the flight attendant. I'm in charge here. Captain! Captain! Tell them." She looked desperately at Captain Miller. Miller looked away, studying the instrument panel of the bulkhead wall. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "You have the right to remain silent," the marshal recited, pushing her toward the door. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law." As they marched her down the short hallway of the galley, they passed row 2. Tiffany struggled, trying to stop. She looked at seat 2A. Evelyn Harper was sipping from a bottle of water. She had her reading glasses back on and was looking at the file in her lap. As Tiffany was dragged past, Evelyn didn't look up. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply turned the page of her document. It was the ultimate dismissal. To Evelyn Harper, Tiffany Preston was no longer a threat, nor a person of interest. She was simply a case number. "Get her off my plane," a second marshal said to the first. "Wait! My bag! My purse!" Tiffany cried as she was hauled across the threshold onto the jet bridge. "It'll be sent to evidence," the marshal said. The passengers watched in stunned silence as the queen of the cabin was perp-walked off the flight she claimed to rule. As she disappeared into the terminal, dragging her feet, a smattering of applause broke out from the economy section. passengers who had been barked at by her earlier during boarding. But in first class there was no applause, just a terrified silence. The passengers in 1A and 1B looked at Evelyn with wide eyes, realizing how close they had been to the blast radius of her power. Evelyn finally looked up. She pressed the call button. A terrified Brittany, the junior flight attendant, appeared instantly. She was shaking so hard the water on her tray was rippling. Yes, Your Honor. Can I get you anything? Evelyn smiled. It was a genuine warm smile. Just a cup of tea, dear, with lemon if you have it. And please, tell the captain we can depart as soon as they clear the paperwork. I have a docket to review. The room was cold, not the uncomfortable chill of an airplane cabin, but the bone-deep, sterile freeze of federal custody. The walls were cinder block, painted a peeling shade of institutional cream. The only furniture was a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs. Tiffany Preston sat in one of them. The handcuffs had been removed, but her wrists were raw and red. She was still wearing her Horizon Air uniform. But without the scarf, the pin and the jacket, she looked diminished. The queen of the cabin was gone. In her place sat a terrified woman who still didn't quite understand the magnitude of what had just happened. She was waiting for her union representative. She had demanded one the moment they read her rights. She was convinced that once the union rep, a bulldog named Jerry, walked in, this would all go away. It would be a misunderstanding, a workplace dispute. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. It wasn't Jerry. It was the bald U.S. Marshal from the plane, accompanied by a woman in a sharp navy suit who introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Laura Bennett. Bennett carried a thick file. She didn't look at Tiffany. She looked through her. "Where is my union rep?" Tiffany demanded, trying to summon a scrap of her old authority. "I'm not saying a word until Jerry gets here." Marshal Reynolds pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down slowly. The metal legs scraped against the concrete floor, a harsh sound that made Tiffany flinch. "Miss Preston," Reynolds said, his voice deceptively low. "Horizon Air was contacted 45 minutes ago. They were informed of the charges. Do you know what their response was?" Tiffany stayed silent, her heart hammering. "They terminated your employment effective immediately. You are no longer an employee of Horizon Air. The union doesn't represent you anymore. You are on your own." The blood drained from Tiffany's face. They can't do that. Without a hearing? They can when the employee commits a felony on federal property against a federal official, Bennett said, opening the file. She slid a photo across the table. It was a still frame printed from a cell phone video. It showed Tiffany, face twisted in rage, hands pressed against Evelyn Harper's chest, shoving her backward. "This was taken by a passenger in 1B, Bennett said. Mr. Arthur Pendleton. We also have statements from the captain, the first officer, your junior flight attendant Brittany, and 12 other passengers. They all say the same thing. You initiated physical contact. You escalated the situation. You assaulted the victim." "She wouldn't listen," Tiffany cried, tears springing to her eyes. "She was arguing. She reached for my badge." "She was reaching for your identification because you refused to provide it," Reynolds corrected. "And instead of de-escalating, as your training dictates, you got physical. With her." Reynolds leaned forward. "Do you actually know who Evelyn Harper is? I mean, really know?" "She said she's a judge," Tiffany sniffled. "So what? That doesn't mean she can break the rules." Reynolds let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Evelyn Harper isn't just a judge, Ms. Preston. She is a senior judge for the U.S. District Court of D.C. She spent 15 years as a federal prosecutor before that. She literally wrote the sentencing guidelines for assault on federal officers in her district. You didn't just push a judge, you pushed a legal institution. Bennett tapped the table. We are charging you under 18 U.S. Code, Section 111, assaulting, resisting, or impeding certain officers or employees. Because Judge Harper was traveling on official business, reviewing case files for a hearing tomorrow, she is considered to be in the performance of official duties. That bumps this up to a federal felony. Felony? Tiffany whispered. The word hung in the air like smoke. Up to 8 years, Bennett said casually. Plus the FAA fines. They're looking at around $37,000 for the interference with crew member duties, though, ironically, you were the crew member interfering with safety. And then there's the civil suit Judge Harper will likely file. Tiffany put her head in her hands. The reality was crashing down on her. The Paris route, the seniority, the pension, the lifestyle. It was all dissolving. I want to apologize, Tiffany stammered, looking up desperately. Can I just talk to her? If I apologize, maybe she'll drop it. It was a mistake. I was stressed. The heat, the delay. Reynolds stood up. He looked at Tiffany with a mixture of pity and disgust. You don't get to talk to her, Tiffany. That's called witness tampering. And Judge Harper doesn't want your apology. She wants the law to be followed. Which is ironic, because that's all she asked for on the plane. Reynolds signaled to the guard at the door. Process her, Reynolds said. Full prints, DNA swab, mugshot, and put her in the general population, holding cell. No special treatment. Wait! Tiffany screamed as the guard grabbed her arm. I'm not a criminal. You can't put me in with criminals. You assaulted a federal judge, Miss Preston, Reynolds said as he walked out the door. In the eyes of the law, you are exactly what you hate. The holding cell beneath the Wilkie D. Ferguson, Jr. United States Courthouse in downtown Miami smelled of industrial bleach, stale bologna, and despair. For Tiffany Preston, a woman who had spent the last 12 years inhaling the expensive perfumes of duty-free shops and the filtered air of first-class cabins, the stench was a physical assault. She had not slept. How could she? The cell was a concrete box shared with 3 other women. One was a frantic young girl, arrested for drug mule suspicions, weeping softly in the corner. Another was a hardened woman with a spiderweb tattoo on her neck, who had spent the night staring at Tiffany with predatory amusement. Tiffany sat on the cold metal bench, her knees pulled to her chest. Her pristine Horizon Air uniform had been confiscated as evidence. In its place, she wore a violently orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, the fabric rough against her skin. Her blonde bob, usually a masterpiece of hairspray and precision, was matted and greasy. Her makeup had been wiped away by a coarse jail-issue towel, leaving her face pale, puffy, and stripped of its armor. She kept waiting to wake up. She kept waiting for the cut command, for someone to tell her this was a training simulation for unruly passengers. But the cold steel of the toilet in the corner was real. The handcuffs biting into her wrists were real. "Preston!" a guard barked, the sound echoing off the cinder blocks. "Movement!" Tiffany scrambled up, her legs numb. "Is it my lawyer? Is it Jerry from the union?" The guard didn't answer. He just shackled her wrists to a waist chain, the heavy clinking sound making her flinch. He led her down a long, white hallway that felt like the bowels of a hospital, but with more guns. They reached an elevator. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, the noise hit her first. It wasn't the orderly hum of an airport terminal. It was the chaotic, hungry roar of a media circus. As the bailiffs led her toward courtroom 4, Tiffany caught a glimpse of the hallway through the reinforced glass of the holding area. It was packed. Cameras flashed like strobe lights. Reporters were shouting into microphones. She saw the logos: CNN, Fox News, TMZ. The headline on a monitor near the security checkpoint seared into her brain. Turbulence in the court. Flight attendant who shoved federal judge faces the hammer. "Keep moving," the bailiff grunted, pushing her forward. They entered the courtroom through a side door. It was freezing, far colder than the airplane cabin had been. The gallery was packed to capacity. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as she entered, the orange of her jumpsuit acting like a beacon of her disgrace. Tiffany scanned the faces. She saw her parents in the third row. Her mother was weeping into a handkerchief. Her father looked pale, staring at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. The shame that washed over her was hotter than the Miami sun. But then, her eyes were drawn to the front row, to the section reserved for victims and federal officials. Evelyn Harper was there. The contrast was devastating. Evelyn looked impeccable. She wore a cream-colored linen suit that spoke of quiet, old money. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon. She sat with a posture that was both relaxed and regal, reading a file through her glasses. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like she owned the building. Next to her sat the U.S. Marshal, Reynolds, and a sharp-eyed woman in a navy suit, Assistant U.S. Attorney Laura Bennett. "All rise," the clerk bellowed. The door behind the bench swung open, and Judge Anthony Sterling swept into the room. In Miami legal circles, Sterling was known as the Hammer. He was a man who viewed his courtroom as a cathedral of order. He tolerated no nonsense, and he had a particular disdain for those who disrespected authority. "Be seated," Sterling rumbled. His voice didn't need a microphone. It filled the room like thunder. He adjusted his robes, put on his reading glasses, and looked down at the docket. He took a long moment to read the file, the silence in the room stretching until Tiffany felt like she couldn't breathe. Finally, Sterling looked up. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked directly at Tiffany. "Case number 24902, United States of America versus Tiffany Preston," Sterling announced. "Charges: assault on a federal officer under 18 U.S. Code Section 111, and interference with flight crew members and attendants under 49 U.S. Code Section 4655004. Tiffany's court-appointed public defender, Mr. Gorski, stood up. He was a disheveled man with coffee stains on his tie, a stark contrast to the high-priced union lawyers Tiffany had expected. "Good morning, Your Honor. Michael Gorski for the defendant. We waive the reading of the indictment and enter a plea of not guilty." "Not guilty," Sterling repeated, his tone flat. "Very well. Let's hear arguments on bail." Laura Bennett, the prosecutor, stood up. She moved with the precision of a shark. "Your Honor, the government requests that bail be denied, or in the alternative, set at a substantial cash bond with strict electronic monitoring." "On what grounds, Ms. Bennett?" Sterling asked. Bennett walked to the podium, placing her hands on the wood. "Your Honor, the defendant has demonstrated a violent, impulsive lack of control in a high-security environment. This was not a bar fight. This was a physical assault on a senior United States district judge inside a commercial aircraft. The defendant used her position of authority, a position entrusted to her for the safety of the public, to batter a 64-year-old woman simply because she was moving too slowly." Bennett paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Furthermore," Bennett continued, "the defendant has been terminated from her employment as of yesterday evening. She has no ties to this community other than an apartment she can likely no longer afford. She faces up to 20 years in federal prison. The flight risk is substantial." Tiffany felt the room spinning. 20 years? For a shove? Mr. Gorski scrambled to his feet. Your Honor, this is hyperbole. My client is 34 years old with 0 criminal record. She has been a flight attendant for 12 years with excellent performance reviews until this incident. This was a momentary lapse in judgment due to extreme stress and heat exhaustion, not a calculated assault. She is not a danger to the community. She is a woman who made a mistake. Judge Sterling listened, his face unreadable. He tapped his pen against the bench. Tap, tap, tap. I see, Sterling said. He looked over his glasses at the prosecution table. I see the victim is present. Judge Harper. The room went deadly silent. Even the court reporter seemed to pause. Evelyn Harper stood up. She didn't rush. She smoothed her jacket and walked to the podium. She didn't need notes. Good morning, Judge Sterling, Evelyn said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but it carried a weight that made Gorski sit down immediately. Judge Harper, Sterling nodded respectfully. Do you wish to be heard regarding the defendant's release? I do, Evelyn said. She turned slightly, not to look at the crowd, but to look directly at Tiffany. Tiffany wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Evelyn's eyes were not filled with anger. They were filled with disappointment. It was the look a mother gives a child who has broken something irreplaceable. Miss Preston, Evelyn began, addressing her directly, ignoring court protocol. For 12 years you wore a uniform that commanded respect. Passengers trusted you with their lives. When you put your hands on me, you didn't just bruise my shoulder. You broke that trust. Evelyn turned back to Judge Sterling. Your Honor, the defense argues that this was a momentary lapse. I disagree. Arrogance is not a lapse. It is a character flaw. Ms. Preston believed that her badge gave her the right to strip a citizen of their dignity. She believed that because I looked like a nobody, her words according to witnesses, that I was deserving of her physical aggression. Evelyn paused, taking a sip of water. However, Evelyn continued, I do not believe she needs to rot in a cell pending trial. She is not a flight risk, largely because she has nowhere to fly to. I do not object to bail, provided the conditions are absolute. What conditions do you suggest? Sterling asked. She is to be grounded, Evelyn said firmly. I ask that she be placed on the federal no-fly list immediately. I ask that she be barred from entering any airport terminal in the United States unless for the purpose of her own deportation, which I assume is not on the table. And I ask for a protective order. I want her nowhere near me, my chambers, or my courtroom. Judge Sterling nodded slowly. He looked back at Tiffany. Ms. Preston, stand up. Tiffany stood, her legs shaking so hard the chains rattled. I have been on the bench for 20 years, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. I have sent men to prison for bank robbery, for racketeering, for murder. But nothing offends this court more than the abuse of power. You were the captain of that cabin, and you acted like a tyrant. Sterling leaned forward. I am setting bond at $100,000, corporate surety accepted. A gasp went through the room. $100,000. Tiffany didn't have that. Furthermore, Sterling continued, pounding the conditions into the record like nails into a coffin. You are to surrender your passport. You are placed on home confinement with GPS monitoring. You are strictly prohibited from entering the premises of any airport, airfield, or aviation facility. You are prohibited from possessing alcohol, and you are to have absolutely no contact with Judge Harper. Sterling paused, his eyes narrowing. And let me be clear, Ms. Preston. You are very lucky that Judge Harper is a woman of grace, because if you had shoved me, you wouldn't be seeing the sunlight until you were eligible for Social Security. Do you understand me? Yes, Your Honor, Tiffany whispered, tears streaming down her face. Bailiff, remand the defendant until conditions are met, Sterling ordered. The gavel banged. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. As the bailiff grabbed Tiffany's arm to drag her back to the cell, she stumbled. She looked back one last time. The courtroom was clearing out. Her parents were huddled with Mr. Gorski, looking terrified and confused about the money. But Evelyn Harper was already moving on. She was standing by the exit, shaking hands with the prosecutor. She checked her watch, a simple, practical timepiece. She picked up her leather briefcase and walked out the double doors into the bright Miami morning. Tiffany realized then, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, that the queen of the cabin was dead. Evelyn Harper had a flight to catch. She was going to D.C., to London, to the world. Tiffany Preston was going back to a cage. And for the first time in her life, she was truly, utterly grounded. 8 months later. The heat in Tallahassee was different from the heat in Miami. In Miami, the humidity felt like a warm embrace, scented with salt water and expensive sunscreen. Here, inside the razor-wire perimeter of the Federal Correctional Institution, the heat felt like a wet wool blanket that you could never kick off. It smelled of cut grass, industrial laundry detergent, and despair. Tiffany Preston sat on a molded plastic chair in the visitation room. The queen of the cabin was dead and buried. In her place sat inmate 4921-CO4. The transformation was total. The sharp, platinum blonde bob that had been her signature look was gone, replaced by a ponytail of natural, dishwater blonde hair that was frizzy from the humidity. Her skin, once glowing from high-end serums and facials, was pale and broke out in stress spots. She had lost weight, her inmate scrubs hanging loosely off her frame. Her hands, which used to flash a fresh French manicure as she pointed at passengers, were now red and chapped from her assigned work detail in the prison kitchen. She stared at the clock on the wall, watching the second-hand tick. Each tick was a reminder of time lost. The heavy steel door buzzed. Mr. Gorski, her lawyer, walked in. He looked older than the last time she saw him. He didn't smile. "Hello, Tiffany," he said, sitting down across the scratched metal table. "Is it done?" Tiffany asked. Her voice was raspy. She hadn't spoken much in weeks. She had learned that in here, speaking up didn't make you powerful. It made you a target. "It's done," Gorski said. He opened his briefcase and slid a thick stack of paperwork toward her. "The plea deal is finalized. The prosecution agreed to drop the deprivation of rights charge in exchange for a guilty plea on the assault on a federal officer charge." Tiffany looked at the papers. "How long?" 18 months, Gorski said softly. "With the 8 months you've already served in remand, and with good behavior credits, you could be out in maybe 6 to 7 months. Then 3 years of supervised probation." Tiffany let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since the plane tarmac. 18 months. That's better than 8 years. "It is," Gorski nodded. "But we need to talk about the civil side, Tiffany." He pulled out another file. This one had the red logo of a collections agency on top. Horizon Air settled with the passengers for the delay and distress. They, along with their insurance carrier, successfully countersued you for the damages and legal fees. The judgment came through yesterday. "How much?" Tiffany whispered. $140,000, Gorski said. Plus, Judge Harper's civil suit for medical expenses and emotional distress was settled for $50,000. Tiffany closed her eyes. "I don't have that kind of money, Mr. Gorski." "You know I don't." "I know," Gorski said gently. "We filed the Chapter 7 bankruptcy petition this morning. The bank is foreclosing on your condo in Brickell next week. Your car has already been repossessed. Your 401k is being liquidated. to pay the IRS debts. A single tear tracked through the dirt on Tiffany's cheek. Everything was gone. The view of the ocean, the designer bags, the status. She was 35 years old, and she was restarting her life with less than zero. She was a felon with a bankruptcy on her record. She would never fly again. "Why?" Tiffany choked out. "Why did they agree to 18 months? The prosecutor, Ms. Bennett. She wanted 5 years. She said she wanted to make an example of me." Gorski hesitated. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a court document. It was personal stationery. "Because of this," Gorski said, "Judge Harper sent a letter to the sentencing board, and she sent a copy for you." Tiffany stared at the envelope. Her hands shook violently as she took it. She expected venom. She expected a final, "I told you so," from the woman she had shoved. She opened it. The handwriting was elegant, firm, and precise. "Ms. Preston, the law is a blunt instrument. It is designed to punish, but I have always believed its true purpose is to correct. The prosecutor argued that you are a danger to society. I argued that you were simply a woman who had lost her way. You believed that power was a weapon, something to be used to belittle those you deemed lesser. You looked at me and saw a nuisance, not a human being. I do not wish for your life to be destroyed. I only wish for your perspective to be widened. I asked for leniency, not because what you did was acceptable, but because I believe you have already lost the thing you valued most, your ego. Arrogance is a heavy bag to carry, Tiffany. I hope that now that you have been forced to check it, you can walk lighter. True authority is not about dominance. It is about service. Treat the janitor with the same respect you show the CEO, and you will never find yourself in this position again. I hold no ill will. I wish you peace. Evelyn Harper. Tiffany read the letter twice. Then she put her head down on the cold metal table and wept. She cried for the condo. Yes, she cried for the job. But mostly, she cried because the woman she had physically assaulted, the woman she had sneered at, had just saved her life. It was a mercy she didn't deserve, and that hurt more than any punishment. Mr. Gorski sat silently, letting her cry. He handed her a pen. "Sign the deal, Tiffany. It's time to go back to the unit." She signed. 3 weeks later, Reagan National Airport, Washington, D.C. The terminal was a chaotic sea of suits, tourists, and noise. It was peak hour. Evelyn Harper sat in the waiting area for Gate 34, a flight bound for London. She had her worn leather tote bag on her lap and was reviewing a case file. "Flight 882 to London is now boarding Group 1, the gate agent announced. Evelyn stood up. She joined the line. Ahead of her, a young man in a frantic rush was arguing with the gate agent. He was loud, rude, and clearly important, or at least, he thought he was. "I don't care about the zone numbers," the man shouted. "I'm first class. Let me through." The gate agent looked flushed and close to tears. Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't call the marshals. She simply placed a hand gently on the counter. "Sir," Evelyn said. Her voice was low, possessing that distinct, undeniable timbre of authority. The man turned, ready to snap at her. He stopped when he saw her eyes, steel grey, unwavering. "This young woman is doing her job," Evelyn said calmly, "and we are all going to the same place. The plane isn't leaving without you. Take a breath." The man opened his mouth to argue, looked at Evelyn, looked at the line of people staring at him, and deflated. "Yeah, okay, sorry." He scanned his pass and walked on. The gate agent looked at Evelyn with wide eyes. "Thank you, Mum." He was a lot. Evelyn smiled. It was the warm, crinkling smile of a grandmother. but the eyes remained sharp. Power is quiet, my dear. Never let them see you sweat. Evelyn scanned her boarding pass. She walked down the jet bridge, her footsteps echoing on the metal. She boarded the plane and found her seat. 2A. She placed her tote bag under the seat in front of her without being asked. She buckled her seatbelt. She looked out the window as the engines roared to life, pushing the aircraft back from the gate. Far away in a Florida prison cell, Tiffany Preston was learning to scrub floors. But here, in the sky, Evelyn Harper was flying. She closed her eyes as the wheels left the ground. Justice had been served. The balance had been restored. And the plane climbed higher, leaving the drama of the earth far, far below. And that is the story of how Tiffany Preston learned the hardest lesson of her life. She thought her uniform gave her the right to belittle others. She thought her badge made her untouchable, but she forgot the golden rule of the skies and of life. You never know who you are talking to. Tiffany lost everything, her career, her fortune, and her freedom, all because she couldn't let go of her ego for 5 seconds. She judged a book by its cover, and that book turned out to be the rule of law itself. It's a brutal reminder that arrogance is the heaviest baggage you can carry. Eventually, life is going to make you check it. What do you think? Did Tiffany deserve the jail time, or was Evelyn Harper too lenient in the end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who needs a reminder to be kind, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Fly safe, everyone, and remember, treat the janitor like the CEO.